Some medieval sources tell an extraordinary story, one that is hard to believe. In the 9th century, a talented and intelligent woman disguised herself as a man. With relentless ambition, she rose through the hierarchy of the church until she reached a position that was nearly impossible for men to achieve at the time: the papal throne. In various records, her name appears as Johannes Anglicus, or sometimes simply Ioannis. Her existence is highly debated. Many historians doubt whether she was ever truly real. And yet, when we dig into the dusty shelves of history, we uncover a vague but persistent tale that has been told for centuries. The story of Pope Joan, a figure both controversial and extraordinary. Today, we open the forgotten pages of the Middle Ages and trace the footsteps of her legend. If you are ready, let's begin. The earliest surviving account that speaks of a woman who rose to the papacy comes from the 13th century. It was written by a Dominican friar in a manuscript that, while it does not give her name, offers details about how she climbed through the church's hierarchy, how she hid her identity, and how she ultimately met her tragic fate once the truth was revealed. According to this version, Joan began her career within the church disguised as a papal secretary. Her intellect and ambition allowed her to rise first to the rank of cardinal, and then, astonishingly, to the papacy itself. But her story ended in tragedy. She became romantically involved with a member of the papal household, and, during a solemn procession attended by nearly the entire city, she went into labor. Shocked and furious, the crowd tied her to a horse, dragged her through the streets, stoned her, and killed both her and her child, burying them in an unmarked grave. This Dominican's account lacked many details, yet it laid the foundation for a legend that would echo through the centuries. Not long after, another Dominican by the name of Martin, living far from Rome in what is now the Czech Republic, retold the tale in greater detail. He gave the mysterious figure a name and shifted the events back to around the year 850, placing her papacy between that of Pope Leo IV and Pope Benedict III. In some accounts, she is called Johannes Anglicus, while in others, her name appears as Ioannis. Martin's version describes Joan as a young girl who disguised herself as a boy and set out on a daring journey to Athens. There, she studied a wide range of subjects, including the liberal arts, gaining the knowledge she would later use to climb the church's ladder of power. Skilled especially in the art of rhetoric, she returned to Rome and advanced step by step until she became cardinal, and eventually the supreme head of the Catholic Church, the Pope. For a woman in the Middle Ages, this was almost unimaginable. Martin's telling of her death echoes the earlier account, but with more detail. He claims that the birth occurred on a street in Rome, once known as the Sacred Way. Afterwards, the Romans shunned that road, calling it by names that meant the street to be avoided, or the forbidden path. Legend has it that for centuries, even into the 13th century, popes themselves would avoid this street, altering their route to steer clear of it. For Martin, this ritual symbolized both the deep disdain for the idea of a female pope and the enduring shadow of the scandal. And yet, this was only the beginning of how the story of Pope Joan would continue to evolve. In later copies of Martin's Chronicle, the fate of Joan shifts into an entirely different direction. In this version, after the shocking birth that exposed her identity, she was captured, stripped of her office, and imprisoned in Rome. There, she spent the rest of her life behind cold walls, humiliated, forgotten, and alone. Her story became one of suffering and sorrow. The most striking detail in this telling, however, is that her son, the very child born during the fateful procession, eventually rose through the ranks of the church himself, becoming the Bishop of Ostia. According to this account, Joan too was later brought to Ostia and buried in a church. Yet for a woman so despised by the memory of the church, such an ending seems almost too merciful. Which is why many return to the older and more brutal version, the one in which both Joan and her child were killed during the procession. By the 14th century, on the eve of the Renaissance, the name of Pope Joan resurfaced in the writings of Petrarch. The Italian poet and humanist linked her death in the 9th century to a series of strange disasters, describing how blood rained from the sky, winged locusts swarmed across France only to drown in the English Channel, storms tore across the land, and countless lives were lost. Over time, stories of Joan spread further, appearing not only in sermons delivered by Dominican friars, but also in manuscripts kept in their libraries. Even the official history of the Church, commissioned by Pope Sixtus and written by Bartolomeo Platina, preserved a version of Martin's account. Yet as the years passed, the legend grew dangerous for the Catholic Church. Interest in Joan shifted from Catholics to Protestants, who saw her tale as a useful weapon. During the trial of the reformer Jan Hus in the early 15th century, his defenders argued that the Church did not truly need a male pope. After all, when Pope Joan reigned, the Church had functioned just fine. The Catholic judges, however, quickly silenced this line of thought. They rejected the claim outright, insisting that Joan had never existed, and they dismissed Hus's argument as irrelevant to the question of the Church's authority. From that point forward, her name disappeared from the proceedings. Still, one peculiar tradition was often said to have been born from her story. For centuries, each new pope was required to undergo a test of gender. Seated upon a special chair known as the sedia stercoraria, a throne with a wide opening in its seat, a cardinal would reach beneath, confirm the pope's masculinity, and then declare to the assembled college of cardinals, "He has two, and they hang well." A strange and humiliating ritual, supposedly born from the shadow of a woman who had once sat upon the papal throne. From the 13th century onward, some sources claimed that the ritual of testing a new pope's gender only began after the time of Joan. Yet with so many later references and scattered records, it is impossible to determine exactly when or if such a practice truly originated. Today, most historians agree that Pope Joan was little more than a legend. To them, she was a fictional character born from the imagination of discontented monks, Protestant reformers, and critics of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Encyclopedia of 1910 declared outright that a pope named Johannes Anglicus never existed. A chronological analysis supports this claim, showing that between Pope Leo IV and Pope Benedict III, there was no room for another pontiff. Many modern scholars have since accepted this conclusion. Even prominent historians, such as John Julius Norwich, argue that the evidence is far too weak to consider Joan a real historical figure, and yet Not everyone is convinced. Some researchers continue to search for proof of her existence. Archaeologist Michael Habicht, for instance, has pointed to medieval coins minted between the years 856 and 886-68, which appear to carry the monogram of Johannes Anglicus. These coins bear the initials of contemporary kings on one side, and on the reverse, the name of Pope Johannes himself. Whether real or not, the story of Pope Joan fascinated people throughout the Middle Ages. It was retold countless times in works of history, legend, and folklore, many of which are now lost. Her tale spread across towns and cities throughout Europe, whispered from generation to generation. And her story did not remain confined to the medieval world. It passed from history into literature, from there into theater, film, and other forms of art, reaching all the way into modern times. As for whether she truly lived, the conflicting records leave her shrouded in mystery. To this day, Pope Joan remains hidden behind a dense cloud of uncertainty. Looking back, we cannot say with certainty whether she was ever real.